Good afternoon. Welcome to the Center for Strategic and International Studies. My name is Andy Cutchins. I'm a director of the Russia and Eurasia program here, and I'm very happy to introduce my colleague and friend, Sergei Markadonov, who has now been a visiting scholar here at the Center for more than 3 years.
Yeah.
It's hard to believe.
Yeah.
It's a long visit. And it's been a great visit.
Fruitful.
Extremely fruitful. They've contributed a tremendous amount to the work of the Russia-Eurasia program and to CSIS, and more broadly to the Washington community with interests in Russia, and particularly in the Caucasus and states around the Caucasus. It's hard to believe that in about 7 months, the Winter Olympic Games of 2014 in Sochi will start. I remember I think it was 7 years ago when Mr. Putin went to Guatemala City and surprisingly, I think, convinced the International Olympic Committee to award the Games to Sochi. I think it was one of his major achievements and symbolically quite important, I think, for him and for Russia, kind of symbolizing Russia's return back as a recovering and resurgent power in the world. Now, there was a joke going around at the time that Mr. Putin arrived with a lot more luggage in Guatemala City than he left with. But all joking aside, I mean, it really was quite an achievement. And we're not going to be talking really about the logistics of getting all of the equipment and hotels and sites ready for the games today, which is quite a challenge in and of itself. But we're going to be talking really about some of the security challenges to holding the games in Sochi. I don't think ever has a winter or summer Olympic games been held in a place with so close in proximity to a region, the Northern Caucasus, which is so rife with conflict, instability, and acts of violence, many of them terrorist acts. So the security challenges for these games is obviously monumental, and I look forward to hearing what Sergei has to say about this kind of broader geopolitical and security environment under which the games will be taking place. So, Sergei, it's great to have you with us here, and look forward to your presentation today. Thanks.
Thank you, Andy. Just today it would be my second presentation. The first one took place a couple of hours ago in Heritage Foundation. That one was devoted to the Eurasian Union and Russian desires in this project. But now let me move a little bit to another direction, to Sochi and problems of ethnopolitics and security around the upcoming Olympics. Andy mentioned the session of International Olympic Committee in Guatemala in 2007. Those times I was just in Abkhazia when I firstly heard about the final decision of this committee and understood that it would be a good topic for my investigations. Of course, the next February, Sochi would be the host of the Winter Olympic Games. Those Olympic Games will be the first Russian-hosted Olympics since the dissolution of USSR. By the way, the idea of Olympic Games in Sochi was discussed in the Soviet times, in the late of Soviet times. But after the dissolution of the Soviet Union and for the first years of the existence of Russia, this topic was put aside because some more important topics were on the table than Sochi. But finally, International Olympic Committee made its choice, and Sochi will be the host city of Winter Olympics. Those Olympics, and Andy is absolutely right, is considered like a symbolic importance event. Just today, the Olympic Games are much more than only sport events. In 2008, in Beijing, China proved its international aspirations and desire to be superpower. Or in 1972, Germany tried to demonstrate that it radically changed its image after Nazis. Of course, taking into account the context of the Munich Olympic Games, this attempt was failed, or maybe not completely, but partially taken into account terrorist attack. But anyway, it was attempt. In Moscow of 1980, originally games conceived like a demonstration of detente, demonstration of разрядка with the West. Of course, Afghanistan changed a little bit this original conceiving, but anyway, it was conceived in this way. Nowadays, Russia tries to demonstrate its recovery, its return to the major league of international policy, and those games are extremely important personally for Vladimir Putin. Now we are not discussing is it right, is it wrong to consider Russia as returning power to the major league, but it's a perception shared not only by Russian officials, but the Russian society also. It's a kind of challenge, because the first Winter Games will be held in subtropical climate. I especially clarified the situation because it was kind of discussion with my colleagues. They claimed Torino in Italy like the first city hosted the Winter Olympic Games, but there is no consensus among geographers on Torino, because on some reasons Torino belongs to subtropical climate, but in terms of rains and winter weather, no. This is why Sochi could be considered like the unique space, the space of Winter Olympics in the subtropical zone. And don't forget that Sochi has been a reputation of the Russian summer capital city, because Vladimir Putin, Dmitry Medvedev, and other representatives of the Russian leadership tend to spend their vacation in Sochi. And this place is also important in terms of decision-making concerning both the Caucasus and global things. Let's remember the trilateral meeting on Nagorno-Karabakh and some other things. This is why Sochi is so important. But climate aside, however, Sochi faces a number of more difficult challenges. Now they are enlisted. First one is the instability in the North Caucasus and challenge of terrorism from this territory. The Circassian issue, having a particular importance in the context of history, of the Russian penetration and expansion in this region, the Georgia-Russian bilateral relations, Russian policy towards the de facto Abkhaz Republic, because in the West, many observers tend to consider Abkhazia like puppet figure of Russia, but in reality, on the ground, situation is much more complicated. And there are many contradictions in the bilateral relations between big Russia and small Abkhazia, small Abkhaz de facto state. And last not least, the dynamics in the Krasnodar region. You know that leader of this region, Alexander Tkachev, governor of this region, is one of public figures of the federal level. He's not only governor of the territory like Krasnodar. And taking into account strategic importance of Krasnodar region and status of summer or informal capital city of Sochi, the role of Alexander Tkachev and his statements is very important. And I'm going to touch particularly this role in my presentation. Unlike recent Olympic host cities such as Beijing, London, or Vancouver, Sochi is very close to the hot spots of the Russian Federation. I mean here, the North Caucasus is the most turbulent region of the Russian Federation. Sochi is 100 kilometers away Karachay-Cherkessia, and it's about 200 kilometers away Kabardino-Balkaria. You know that in the early 90s, Kabardino-Balkaria was called as a sleeping beauty of the Caucasus. Nowadays, it's incorrect because in the period between 2010-2012, Kabardino-Balkaria held the third rate in so-called terrorist competition in the North Caucasus, even winning this competition with Chechnya. It's interesting that data of 2012 demonstrated a decrease of the number of terrorist attacks practically everywhere in the North Caucasus. The one exception was Ingushetia. Even in Dagestan, leader of terrorist attacks in the North Caucasus since 2005, the number of terrorist attacks decreased in 15% in 2012. Many reasons, many prerequisites for it, but anyway, till nowadays, the North Caucasus still keeps turbulency, and it's considered like a potential threat, potential danger for Olympic Games. Don't forget that in 2007, one of terrorist structures of the North Caucasus underground, Dagestani Vilayat, claimed to attack Olympic objects in Sochi. And nowadays, Dagestani Vilayat is the most powerful terrorist structures in the North Caucasus. Because taking aside Chechnya, the most or the strongest operation, counter-terrorist operation, was provided by the Russian troops or forces of interior just against the Dagestani Vilayat. It's a part of the Caucasian Emirate, but it's impossible to consider Caucasian Emirate like CPSU or other vertical structures. It's kind of network. And different cells of this network behave in accordance with their own strategy, tactics. And this is why it's so hard to make any prognosis or predictions on the future development of those structures, like the Caucasus Emirate or Dagestani Vilayat. Today, the North Caucasus breeds instability beyond the region itself. It's also necessary to understand, and by the way, Dagestani Vilayat was engaged in bombings in Moscow metro, attack on Nevsky Express, a special railway between Moscow and St. Petersburg. That is photo of Domodedovo International Airport, one of the biggest transportation hub in Moscow. The Circassian issue, the second important question, I try to consider it separately from the general context of the North Caucasus. Of course, in the period of late 90s and especially since the first half of 2000s, nationalism was replaced as the leading political discourse in the North Caucasus by radical Islamism. Or politicized Islamism. It's more correct because politicized Islamism have different faces. It's not restricted by Salafi activities. Let's see on Ramzan Kadyrov. He is also politicized Islamist, but pro-Russian, loyal to Vladimir Putin personally, but anyway, he is not champion or provider of secular policy, of course, in the territory of Chechnya. Or another example, Sufi Muslims in Dagestan. They are not also providers of secular policy. They make very actively on the area of Islamization. This Islamization is very different from Salafi activities or jihadism, but anyway, it's also part of the picture of politicized Islamism. And politicized Islamism became the leading discourse, leading political discourse in the Caucasus. But it doesn't mean that nationalism was abolished completely. We could speak about new nationalism. New nationalism which doesn't appeal directly to separation from Russia, but which is active in terms of interpretations of history, or prerogatives, discussion on regional prerogatives of the original local powers. And we have now in the North Caucasus two types or two phases of new nationalism. One of them is represented by Ramzan Kadyrov. It's the practice of privatization of republic by one person and political group. close to him. And other case is extremely different. It relates to grassroots activity. It's multi-faced. I mean here Circassian issue. Nowadays it's kind of myth to consider Circassian issue like a consequence of preparation to the Olympic Games. Of course, Sochi itself has historical importance for Circassians, both in Russia and in diaspora, because in 1961, Medjlis was provided in Sochi. It was an attempt to resist to the expansion of the Russian Empire. It was an attempt to create something something similar or something looking like proper state, because proper state of Circassia, it's not reality, of course. It's kind of discovery of the British diplomats. By the way, I've prepared special quote of one British diplomat, David Urquhart, if you would have some questions, of course. But anyway, it was an attempt to create proper state, to be more active, to resist the Russian imperial expansion. But in 1864, Gbade, nowadays it's Krasnaya Polyana, beloved place of vacations of Vladimir Putin and Dmitry Medvedev, was the first battle, was the last place of last battle of the Caucasian War. After this battle, fourth son of Nicholas I, Russian Emperor Mikhail Nikolaevich, provided a military parade on the Krasnaya Polyana, and one of the consequences of the finish of Caucasian War was emigration, or outflow of Circassians from the Caucasian region. And some historians, but more journalists, tend now to consider those events like genocide. And you know that in May 2011, the Georgian parliament recognized alleged genocide of Circassians. It's interesting, by the way, that the first declaration of genocide recognition was done within the framework of the Russian Federation. Now it's completely forgotten. In 1992, the parliament of Kabardino-Balkaria adopted a special law on the recognition of genocide. But in 1996, another Republican parliament of Adygea adopted an address to the federal power to recognize genocide of Circassians. And in 1994, President Yeltsin, with no recognition of genocide, begged a pardon for the Russian policy for atrocities, damages taken place in the period of Caucasian War. But it would be wrong to restrict the problem to discussion on genocide, its recognition and history. The Circassian question could be characterized in a more correct way like Circassian questions. Because in different Adygean entities of the Russian Federation, there are 4 entities in Russia with Adygean population: Kabardino-Balkaria, Karachay-Circassia, Krasnodar Krai, and Adygea. Those entities have their own agenda. In Kabardino-Balkaria, the problem of self-governing and problem of land disputes is the most topical. In the context of Karachay-Circassia, the most important problem for Circassian minority, unlike Kabardino-Balkaria where Circassians are in majority, Circassians in Karachay-Circassia suffer from their underrepresentation in the power, in the Republican level power. This is why any appointments within the Republican administration are rather sensitive for different ethnic groups. In the case of Adygea, the most important problem is repatriation. This problem has become more topical after the civil war in Syria. You know that there is Adygean population in Syria. Estimates are rather different, between 30,000 to 120,000. You know that in the censuses of Syria as well as in the Turkish Republic, there were no special criteria like ethnicity, only religion background, but not ethnicity. And don't forget about intermarriages between Arabs, Kurds, and Circassians. This is why what criteria of identification do you apply, and the number and estimate of your number would depend on the criteria used for the identification of this person or that person. Anyway, there is a problem which is so topical, and Circassians from Syria addressed about 7 times to the Russian parliament, to the Russian government, to consider this problem. This problem is not so simple, taking into account variety of challenges existing in the North Caucasus, ethnic tensions, growing Islamism, and so on. But anyway, Russia experienced some more or less successful attempts for repatriation. First of all, in this context, I wish to mention the experience of repatriation of Adigs or Circassians from Kosovo in 1999. They were more or less successfully adopted and integrated. In Adygea, only some families left this republic for Germany and Turkey, but most of them till nowadays have been existing in this territory. I think the problem of Russia is the absence of clear position on this topic. We could agree or disagree with the position of the Turkish Republic on the Armenian genocide, on issues of Kurds, or problems related to Greeks or Assyrians. But anyway, there is an interpretation, there is a model, explanation model of the government. In case of Russia, we have seen keeping silence as the best option for this discussion and this topic. I'm not sure that it's the best option for this issue. By the way, speaking about Circassian movement, couple of last but not least points. This movement or movements, unlike Salafis and jihadis, are non-violent. It's necessary to understand, it's very important. And there is a bunch of different attitudes to the Russian Federation. Some of organizations, especially Adygy Hasa in Krasnodar Krai or Adygea, are engaged in the cooperation with the local governments and federal government in issues of repatriation, discussion of quotas, and so on. Some of them are more radical. And of course, speaking about diaspora attitudes, we need to take into account such phenomenon as remote nationalism. It's not unique in the Circassian case. The same cases could be described if we would speak about Armenian development, development of Armenian diaspora or Jewish diaspora, and so on. Sochi is a part of the Russian-Georgian relationship. Practically immediately after the decision of International Olympic Committee, officials of Georgia tried to discuss the perspective of boycott of the Olympic Games, comparing Sochi Olympic Games with Afghanistan situation in 1979 with Moscow for 1980. But just recently, a new government of Georgia, which won elections in previous October, promoted the Georgian participation. The National Committee of Georgia supported the participation of the Georgian delegation for the Olympic Games. Till nowadays, Russian and Georgian normalization process is maybe not so successful. It's not a success story, of course. We could note only some steps towards each other, like opening of the Russian market for wines, for mineral waters, or facilitation in the checkpoint Kazbegi-Verkhny Lars on the military Georgian road, Военно-Грузинская дорога. It's border, it's a North Ossetian part of the Russian-Georgian border. But the Georgian participation in the Olympic Games could be also considered like one of the steps towards each other, because nowadays the problem of Abkhazia and South Ossetia could not be considered like a real ground for compromise, because views on those topics are completely different. And don't forget about more actors in this problem. This problem is not a two-colored issue between Russia and Georgia. Don't forget about Abkhazia and South Ossetia. And now let me turn to Abkhazia and the Russian-Abkhaz partnership. I am repeating once again, in the West, many people tend to consider Abkhazia like puppet figure of Russia, forgetting about very complicated dynamics of Russian-Abkhaz bilateral relations, like blockade of Abkhazia in the late 90s, some attempts of Russia to put Georgia and Abkhazia together, project of Yevgeny Primakov of the Common State, and so on, so on. This politics was not eternal after the, or permanent after the USSR demise in 1991. Nowadays, Abkhaz people and Abkhazian leadership, of course, enjoy the protection from the Russian side. Many people in Abkhazia really believe that Georgian issue is over. Now it's not in question in agenda. Because nowadays Abkhazia is protected by the Russian militaries, but this situation closing one set of the problems opened another one. And nowadays people in Abkhazia, especially opposition, it's irony that Raul Hadjimba, the leading opponent of the current president of Abkhazia, in 2004 was supported by Russia as a successor of Vladislav Arzenba, the first de facto president of Abkhazia. But currently Raul Hadjimba is leader of opposition, who is so critical to the current leadership of Abkhazia, and he repeats from time to time, we need to develop our own security structure, not relying completely on Moscow, because Moscow has its own interests. It's normal, of course. Each country has and provides its own interests. It's not know-how of Russia or United States or any other countries. And of course, Abkhaz independence is not recognized by the most of countries, but it doesn't deny presence or existence of proper interests on the Abkhaz side. They are concerning first and foremost by the penetration of the Russian big business. Some desires of Russia to make discoveries of oil in the Black Sea. It's a problem. It's not coincidence that previous year president of Abkhazia, Alexander Nkvab, who is loyal to Russia, of course, rejected the project of road building between Cherkessk and Sukhumi, concerning about ecology, environmental protection, and so on, but we understand that the most important concern of Abkhaz is demography. In the Soviet Georgia, they compose 17% of the total population. It was data of 1989, 3 years before the conflict with Georgia. But Russia is a little bit bigger than Georgia. And migration of relatives, Circassians, Abaza people from the North Caucasus, even ethnic Russians, could be also treated like demographic challenge for Abkhazia. And in this context, Sochi is considered on the one side as maybe benefit, but on another side as a concern, because we have, I'm repeating once again, deal with the asymmetric partnership between Abkhazia and Russia. And the difference of scales, weights is so visible in Abkhazia. This is why Abkhaz were rather concerned about the appointment of Alexander Tkachев as a special envoy in Abkhazia, by the way. Now let me turn to Alexander Tkachев, the next hero. Krasnodar Krai has a strategic importance for the Russian Federation. First of all, in terms of population, Krasnodar Krai is the third area in Russia after Moscow and Moscow region. You know that Moscow as a capital city and Moscow region are different constituencies according to the Russian constitution. There are some plans to unite them, but it's only plans or drafts for discussion. The total population of Krasnodar Krai is roughly 5.5 million people. And this territory is interesting to migrants from the former USSR. Today, Armenians are the second ethnic group in Krasnodar Krai. different estimates of population, but about 500,000 people. Georgians, people from the North Caucasus, and so on. And of course, Krasnodar Krai is the only territory of Russia which has access to the Black Sea shore after the loss of Sebastopol and Crimean Peninsula. And who knows, maybe Novorossiysk would be considered like the one of the important bases for the Russian Black Sea Fleet. We could not predict or make prognosis on the development of the bilateral Russian-Ukrainian relations or some other issues. And after the USSR collapse, Krasnodar region is represented like interesting or particular type of the Russian regions with traditionalism, ideology, sentiments, and maybe it's the most effective region in terms of the development of the process of Cossacks revival. Because the idea of Cossack land, primordial Cossack land, became kind of semi-official in Krasnodar region. And this is why many statements of Alexander Tkachev are rather nationalistic. In comparison with his predecessor, Nikolai Kondratyenko, who was rather anti-Semitic, he fought against Zionism conspiracy in Moscow and around. Tkachev concentrated on the different Caucasian ethnic groups. In the early 2000s, Armenians became target for his criticism, cunning Armenians with their enterprises and so on. Meskhetian Turks. By the way, in 2004, practically all Meskhetian Turks from the Krasnodar region left this territory. It was a unique case when migration was done due to ethnic reasons, not problems of everyday life or some other problems, but in terms of ethnic tensions, ethnic reasons. And Kurdish people. And previous year, Alexander Tkachev proposed a rather specific idea to create so-called migration filters against the people from the North Caucasus, forgetting that North Caucasus is not Turkey, it's not Armenia, it's an integral part of the Russian Federation. I think this attempt could be characterized like a policy of the Russian separatism. In one of my articles, I proposed this term because this idea really promoted answer from the side of ethnic republics. If we are citizens of Russia and could not live, could not stay in Krasnodar area, what's the sense for us to be citizens of the Russian Federation? I think those attempts could be considered more like destructive for the unity and integrity of the Russian Federation. But previous year, after his statements on the migration filter, Alexander Tkachev received Черная метка, black note from the Kremlin. He didn't lead the party list of United Russia for the local parliamentary elections. Let's see. Many sources say that Tkachev would be untouchable before the Olympic Games. Let's see after. Because after Olympic Games, another sport holiday is expected, World Cup, Soccer World Cup in 2018. And some cities, Sochi, by the way, would be one of the hosts of this Soccer Cup. Thus, making a conclusion, the first subtropical Winter Olympic Games will require from the Russian authorities not only high-quality creativity in public relations, in advertising, but also in enhanced ability to provide security as a high standard. Security and more or less reliable level of inter-ethnic relationship on those territories. Thank you, and now I am ready to receive your questions, comments. to react on your notes, objections. Thank you.
Okay, Sergey, thanks very much. It's a very comprehensive presentation. I wonder if I could offer the first question. You alluded to the Dagestani Vilayat, I think, that had said it was looking to target the Sochi Games. How much, to the extent that you are aware of this, I mean, how much chatter among other groups and individuals have expressed or have identified Sochi as a target, as a specific target for their cause?
Okay, good question. It's not coincidence I paid special attention to the Dagestani Vilayat because till nowadays, by this time of day, only Dagestani Vilayat expressed this opinion to label Sochi as a potential target. But it doesn't mean other groups or subgroups would not have any ideas to target Sochi. Because for terrorists, maybe it's better to keep secrets, to not discuss the potential scenarios or maybe number of forces for participation in such terrorist attacks. Dagestan is further to Sochi in comparison with Kabardino-Balkaria and Karachay-Cherkessia. Kabardino-Balkaria is in my mind, much more important in this context, because for last 4 years, this territory became much more vulnerable in terms of terrorist challenge and dangers. And this situation is brilliantly understood by the leadership of both republics, because from time to time they ask federal government to maybe increase the financial support of those republics to keep more stable and more comfortable. For whom the war is war, for anybody it's kind of interesting business, administrative business, who knows.
Okay, let's open the floor to questions and comments. Please just raise your name, raise your hand. When I call on you, identify yourself, your name and your affiliation. Yes, over here, Mikhail.
Sergey, I'm sorry. Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, Mikhail Mamedov, Georgetown University. Well, you mentioned you concentrated on several points in your presentation. By the way, thank you so much for a fascinating presentation. But I watch from time to time Echo of Moscow, its program where main editor-in-chief is Alexei Benediktov. And they keep saying, when they talk about Sochi Olympics, they go from time to time and they keep saying that Russia is not ready for Sochi Olympics. The Sochi Olympic would be major fiasco. So what is it? Is it taken simply out of blue? How would you react to this? Thank you. And well, the second question is, you talked several times about Greater Cherkessia, but Abkhazia is also a part of Greater Cherkessia. Abkhazians were also Cherkess to a certain point, or maybe the cousins of Cherkess. And when you talk about repatriation, what do you know about repatriation of muhajirs? Muhajirs are those people who were forced out by the Russians in 1860. Some of them were forced out from Abkhazia, and when Russians moved, well, Cossacks moved on the north part of Greater Cherkessia, Georgians moved to the south, which eventually became, Abkhazia became a part of Georgia. What do you know about repatriation of Abkhaz, so Cherkessians into Abkhazia? Thank you.
Great questions, especially the second one. As for the Echo of Moscow, of course, I am observing all Russian media, and I got acquainted with estimates made by Boris Nemtsov. My first estimate, I am not going now to criticize Alexei Venediktov or Boris Nemtsov, but in the case of Boris Nemtsov, it's necessary to understand that he is a politician. For politician, the problem of analysis is not the problem. For him, there is another agenda, another methodology, another aims and goals. It's not bad, it's not good. He is politician, I am not politician, I am analyst. When I would be politician, I would behave like Nemtsov, Navalny, or some other persons. But I'm not sure that this choice is the optimal. Of course, I could agree with some points of criticism from Nemtsov's side or Echo Moskvy side. First of all, environment, corruption, maybe violation of human rights and rights of property in Sochi, of course. But this goal is begun realizing. Nowadays, it's impossible to stop this process because losses from this stopping would be more than currently. It's understandable for any policymakers. Putin, Ivanov, Petrov, no matter. As for Circassians and Abkhaz people, you are absolutely right characterizing those relations like relations between cousins, not brothers, not sisters, cousins. A relationship between Circassians or Circassian movements, it's more correct to say, because we have no such judicial faces like Circassians or Abkhaz people. Different movements, of course, national movements, and Abkhaz were dependent on many factors. In the early 90s, many Circassians were engaged in the conflict with Georgia on the Abkhaz side. About 3,000 volunteers were engaged. And Circassian groups led by Muayed Shorov played a significant role in the assault of building of ministry or building of Council of Ministers controlled by Georgia in Sukhumi. And then Sultan Sasnaliyev was Minister of Defense in Abkhazia and even a Vice Prime Minister. Now he died. But after 2011, we could speak about differences between Abkhazia and some Circassian movements, because you know that Georgia recognized the alleged genocide of Circassians, and many Circassians, including guys who fought against Georgians like Ruslan Keshev, like Ibrahim Yeganov, of course, like Ibrahim Yeganov supported this decision, and they opposed themselves to Abkhaz people. And nowadays, especially in internet, in social networks, we could see internet fight, not real fight, between Circassian activists and Abkhaz activists, because many Circassians proposed Abkhaz people to be more tolerable to Georgians like Ibrahim Yeganov and so on, so on. It's interesting that in 90s, the Abkhaz parliament adopted a special law on repatriation and recognition of genocide in 1997. And Abkhaz government tried from time to time to realize programs on repatriation. The problem of Mahajirs is also so sensitive for Abkhaz people. It's point of consensus. As for Abkhaz people, many of them left Abkhazia in 1966 after the so-called Likhny rebellion. And nowadays, in the territory of Turkey, there were more descendants of ethnic Abkhaz than on territory of Abkhazia. But any programs, any attempts to make repatriation, to realize programs of repatriation of Abkhaz people failed. Because, you know, Abkhazia is a country with suspended sovereignty, with disputed status. It's great. Russia recognized its independence as well as Venezuela or Nicaragua, but not most of countries of the world, like in the case of Kosovo. In terms of poverty or prosperity, Abkhazia is incomparable with Turkey, for example. This is why we could name some cases of repatriation. I know even personally some people who repatriated to Abkhazia, but it's limited by maybe dozens, not hundreds, not thousands. Some of them began business in Abkhazia. Hotel Yesemin, maybe you know if you travel to Abkhazia, Hotel Yesemin belongs to a guy, the Turkish citizen of the Abkhaz background, some business in coal mining and so on, but it's very limited. But anyway, nevertheless, Turkey recognizing the territorial integrity of Georgia tries to keep Abkhaz window opened. In 1999, Deputy of Minister of Foreign Affairs of Turkey visited Abkhazia, for example, and Sergei Bagapsh, on the eve of his death, also visited Turkey, and the Georgian Foreign Ministry protested, and imagine what answer was given by the Turkish Foreign Policy Minister. It's a personal deal of Sergei Bagapsh. We have not been informed about this visit. Looks like детский сад, kindergarten. But seriously, in terms of realization of national interests.
Steve.
Yes, Steve Benson, CSIS. Sergey, if you look back to Vancouver and then to London, where there were arguably pretty good security apparatus and capabilities in place, they still scrambled at the last minute. You had lots of stories about putting capabilities in place and problems for security. Enhancing the security in this region, in this geography, are they on schedule to do this? Beyond the logistics and the infrastructure and all that, is that going to be in place are they considering that up front? They're working with the folks that did this before to make this a secure Olympics? In both cases, in Vancouver, there was not as much in place with regards to keeping track of what moved in and around the region, specifically from an air standpoint. So the land-sea boundaries there, being able to keep track of all the private air, the helicopters, the yachts that come in, everyone who has who is rich and has a means of transportation wants to come in, and it saturates the space. So from a standpoint of just looking at this from a dependent standpoint, that put in more capability. But from the London standpoint, there was an issue of independent standpoint in Vancouver. From a dependent standpoint, it was looking at targets just that they thought, or just looking at the traffic in the area, so they could keep track of who was there and what was moving around. This was both from actually looking at it from a radar standpoint and actually looking at it from a transponder standpoint. These kinds of territories with this topography that's canalized and difficult to get around, there's a lot of ways to egress and ingress from the space. So I'm wondering if they're looking at this.
Hey, I am not the best person who could speak about technical stuff of the security, because I concern more on ethnopolitical dimension of the security. But of course, you are absolutely right speaking about vulnerabilities. In the case of Sochi, there are many vulnerabilities, like access to the sea, for example, seashore, it's a kind of potential challenge, or narrow roads. Most of them were built in the period of Stalin, and they are rather vulnerable in terms of traffic jams and so on. Montana's relief is also dangerous and so on. I know that Russians addressed for consultancy to Israeli specialists By the way, it provoked some tensions in relationship between Georgia and Israel because those guys visited Abkhazia and they were former generals, highest rank generals of the Israeli army, but it's impossible to discuss the issues of the Sochi security without Abkhazia. So in the Soviet times, Sochi-Sukhumi was the single tourist or resort complex. It was considered in this way. I think in terms of security, it's impossible to separate. Even we put aside the problem of Russian-Georgian relations, status of Abkhazia, and so on and so on. I think, observing the current tendencies, Russians would secure security basing on the Soviet patterns, first of all. Limitation of people who would travel to Sochi, registration. By the way, many people know about specific regime of registration both in Moscow and St. Petersburg, but there is a regime of registration in Stavropol Krai and Krasnodar Krai. No in my native Rostovskaya Oblast, but in Krasnodar, yes. Once upon a time I traveled to Abkhazia and stopped in Adler, it's the last railway point to the de facto border, and I heard the information in the station. Господа, у кого нет регистрации в Краснодарском крае, зарегистрируйтесь, пожалуйста. Dear ladies and gentlemen, if you have no registration in Krasnodar Krai, please do it ASAP, as soon as possible. This is why, due to those mechanisms, Russians would provide more or less effective control.
Steve, just a couple of times I've raised questions, but they've been in public or semi-public formats with U.S. government officials from the State Department or from the National Security Council. But, are we working with our Russian colleagues to address the security challenges in Sochi? And the answer is yes. Period. That's all I've gotten. Yeah, that's a good start. Could be good.
Anyway, special thanks to Andy for this commentary. Yeah, I also heard more positive estimates from the Russian side on this cooperation. Because usually United States of America represent the most numerous delegations for all Olympics. Sochi would not be except, and this is why there is a special concern. For US-American cooperation, there is another thing, another topic, deficit of pragmatism. Because we continue to discuss tactics with ideological stamps, like re-Sovietization and so on and so on. Put them aside. Let's discuss real interests and mutual benefits. It's much more productive, I think, for both sides. Not Magnitsky law, Dima Yakovlev law, or some other things. They are not so important for the mutual relations.
Ella in Freedom House. Sergey, thank you very much for a great presentation. I have two questions, actually. In the list of the potential security obstacles listed, terrorist threat from the militant underground is very real, which also imply that the competence or the ability to deter this terrorist threat by the security services may be limited. Should the competence of security services also be a consideration of, as a security concern with respect to Sochi Olympics? That's one question. And second question is, in light of the recent, what some call political cleansing of the political elite in Dagestan, starting with the arrest of Said Amirov and all the corruption cases that have emerged since then. Do you believe that may be some connection to preparing and ensuring some security or changing the political dynamic in Dagestan to provide a better security before the Olympics? Thank you.
Thank you. Let me be brief on the first question. Of course, yes. Of course. And because when corporate interests violate or dominate or violate interest of the state, it's a danger in any way. In every cases, American, Russian, and so on. I think cooperation or strict coordination is required. If you would be interested to raise your chances. As the second question, first of all, I'm not sure that now we could make any conclusions about the real changes of the Russian attitude to Dagestan. Said Amirov was kind of symbol who was the mostly visible or clear. You know that Dagestan maybe is the only constituency, not only in the Caucasus, but generally in Russian Federation without vertical and with real freedom of press. Not due to democracy, but due to different groups controlling different mass media. This is why it's really admiration or satisfaction to read Dagestani newspapers, Chernovik and so on. You could agree, you could disagree, but the level of estimate is really different from the third general topics of the regional mass media. The first topic is love to Vladimir Putin, the second topic is love to the regional president or governor, and third topic в мире интересного. About animals, about zoos, about theaters, and some other blah blah. But in the case of Dagestan, it was really interesting content. But don't forget that mayor of any other cities of Dagestan are real policymakers. What's about Said Pasha Makhanov? I am not sure that resources of Said Pasha Makhanov, mayor of Khasavyurt, are really less or weaker than resources of Said Amirov. What's about resources of Imam Yeraliyev, mayor of Derbent, gateway of Russia to the South Caucasus? Huge resources. Amirov is kind of symbol. In terms of PR, first of all, because the federal government tries to demonstrate it. Please see, please be afraid of Ramazan Abdullatipov. He is a very strong guy. He can. He could, he should, and so on. But in reality, I don't see real prerequisites for changes. Till nowadays, and of course, Russia criticized, or representatives of Russian officials or some guys who are close to the federal authorities criticized Said Amirov. Oh, he is bandit, he is a gangster, and so on, so on. But why did you keep silence, guys, in 1999? When Said Amirov secured real military help to the federal troops against Basayev and Khattab? Why did you keep silence when Said Amirov secured results for United Russia, minimizing chances of communists, which were very strong, by the way, in Dagestan? And I think in Dagestan, communists are very required because it was the only secular force, including different ethnicities of Dagestan. Communists are very, very valuable in Dagestan. Because in another way, a social protest would be privatized by radical Muslims. And it's interesting because situation in Dagestan was formed as a result of deficit of the federal presence, especially after formation of Chechen Republic of Ichkeria. You know that Dagestan was practically cut from the rest of Russia. And of course, clans, informal ties began playing a more important, sometimes key role. But it's not only a responsibility of Said Amirov or guys who were closer to him. And the most important question, what kind of model could replace the model of Amirov or Amirovs around Dagestan? It's an inevitable question. The most important thing. What effective model would replace this? Of course, I recognize this model is not so good. It's ineffective. It's privatization of republic. What's instead? Are you ready to propose real things? Not only one demonstrative step like arrest of Said Amirov, but real changes. I'm not sure.
Competency of security services, the first question.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah, I answered.
Okay.
It's a challenge, yes.
Okay. Let me make a comment. I can't help but this, but because it also ties in with the U.S.-Russian relationship. You know, I think there are so many questions about the experience of Tamerlan Tsarnaev and the Tsarnaev brothers. And I mean, obviously, it was a massive security failure on our part, on the U.S. part. But there are an awful lot of questions about what Russian security services were doing or not doing when Tamerlan Tsarnaev returned to Dagestan and to Russia for the 6-7 months in the first half of 2012. And I mean, if we're to believe the reports that have come out from Novaya Gazeta and other Russian sources, there's fairly clear evidence that Tamerlan Tsarnaev was engaged in meetings and activities which should have certainly been of concern to Russian local and federal intelligence services who had alerted the U.S. the previous year about their concern about the radicalization of Tamerlan. Believe the reports that have come out from Novaya Gazeta and other Russian sources, there's fairly clear evidence that Tamerlan Tsarnaev was engaged in meetings and activities which should have certainly been of concern to Russian local and federal intelligence services who had alerted the U.S. the previous year about their concern about the radicalization of Tamerlan Tsarnaev. I guess the good news is that this experience has led to led to the awareness on the U.S. and Russian government that the inadequacies of our cooperation on intelligence sharing and about that. But I mean, the competency of it doesn't look like a sterling hour for the competency of intelligence services on either side, for sure. I guess I'll leave it at that. Maybe there'll be some other commentary further.
In your case, Andy, the problem is confidence and trust. It's other deficit of pragmatism, but deficit of trust.
Well, no, I think there were other problems there were serious procedural and bureaucratic problems on the U.S. side, leading to sort of the oversight of Tamerlan Tsarnaev. The distrust issue is certainly a big piece of it, and why intelligence sharing is so hard anyway, even with close allies, because of concern about revelation of sources and all that.
Hi, Michael Hodge from State Department. Just a couple quick questions. First one specifically can you talk about the organized crime element in Sochi and a relationship with the host organizing committee and senior officials? And the second question is, in this region specifically, but they've recently hosted the Asia Pacific Economic Conference. They have the Winter Games. They have the World Cup coming up as well after Brasilia. They're going to have G8 following the Olympics. They have the Kazan Games going on right now. So what's changed to move such international events in such a small time frame, if you understand what I'm trying to say?
Since what time do we analyze the changes? I don't see any real change, but with what period?
Well, the academic conference was just a few years ago.
No, APEC was last year.
For that one, for Sochi?
No, Vladivostok.
Yeah.
APEC was held in Vladivostok in the Russian Far East.
It's Far East. It's about 4,000 kilometers from Krasnodar. But anyway, of course, you are absolutely right that the influence of organized crime or corruption or informal ties in the business around such objects like Olympic objects or objects for forum, of course, they exist. I don't think that we could really make conclusions on radical decrease of them or real changes.
Well, one difference is that Russia is much more wealthier than it was in the 1990s, for sure. I mean, holding major events like the Olympics or the World Cup are very, very, very expensive. So consider for Russia was not really realistic for Russia to consider doing that at the end of the 1980s and through the 1990s. And I think it's no coincidence that Russia effectively became solvent. They paid off their Paris Club debt. They'd paid off their IMF debt the year previously in 2005 and 2006. 2007 was, they go international and get this big prize for Sochi. So just simply the wealth factor of the country is important. For things like APEC or G8, there are different things that are driving them. I mean, holding APEC for Russia was Russia's effort to make its sort of symbolizing its own Asia pivot, if you will. Mm-hmm. Russia hosting the G8 back in 2006 for the first time, and now in 2014 again in Sochi. This is 2006 was very symbolic because this again represented Russia's membership, if not quite full membership in the G8, the first time that it was hosting it. So it held a lot of I think political significance.
I would like to ask about demographic challenge, Armenians as demographic challenge for Abkhazia and for Krasnodar Krai. How do you think how it will influence on Sochi Olympic Games? And, what is the place of this game surrounding the Armenian population in Krasnodar Krai and the authority in Krasnodar Krai, their position concerning to Armenians? What do you think about that?
Thank you, Tigran. First of all, let me make one methodological distinction. Two different cases in principle, because in Krasnodar Krai, the ethnic majority, Russian majority, is about 85%. In the case of Abkhazia, the number of Armenians is practically equal to the number of Abkhaz people. Even if we would follow the official data, official statistics of the de facto authorities. And the problem of Armenian community is not related directly with Sochi. But this problem is crucially important for the national building of Abkhazia and perspective of Abkhazia. Because you know that nowadays Abkhazia tends to combine principles of ethnocracy and multi-ethnicity. On the one side, any representatives of Abkhazia try to demonstrate their benevolence to multi-ethnicity. They try to stress, in the period of 1992-1993, Armenians, Russians, Greeks, Jewish people fought with us against Georgian invasion, aggression, and so on, so on, so on. But at the same time, let's see on the number of Armenians in the government or in the parliament. In the parliament of Abkhazia, there are only 3 Armenians. 3 Armenians, no more. But we know about active engagement of Armenians in the war on the Abkhaz side. Battalion Bagramyan battalion, and engagement of such persons like Galus Tropizanyan and Sergei Mativasyan and some other persons. It was very important for Abkhazia. But at the same time, we have underrepresentation of Armenians in the structures. But at the same time, in the sphere of business, Armenians are very active. In terms of tourism business, private driving from the Russian side to Abkhazia. Personally, I prefer to cross the border through so-called Armyansky Dvorik in Adler, in Blinova district. It was cheaper and faster. For extra 100 rubles, you would save a couple of hours of expecting on the border. Private excursions made by Armenians are also cheaper inside Abkhazia, and in terms of quality, I prefer to those excursions. I don't have anything against Abkhaz people, but anyway. This is why it's a real problem. By the way, as a situation in Gali district inhabited by Migralians or Georgians, this number is about 45 or 50,000 people. The problem of their integration is also very important. The problem of citizenship, obtaining citizenship for them is very important. And you know that Abkhaz Constitution, Article 49, strictly prohibits for all minorities, non-Abkhaz people, to be elected as a president of Abkhazia. This is why it's problematic.
Okay, I've got three questions from the back row.
Thank you for your presentation, Alexander Meligishvili, IHS Global Insight. I have two questions. One has to do with your perspective on the Russian-Georgian security cooperation in the run-up to Sochi Olympics. As you probably know, Prime Minister Ivanishvili made a statement in this regard, promising full cooperation with regard to security of the upcoming games, and made a rather controversial decision about Georgia's participation in the Olympic Games. It seems like Georgia will be sending a delegation to the Sochi Olympics. And the second question has to do with your take on Bilalov's dismissal and the whole controversy surrounding that in the context of the preparations for the Sochi Olympics. Thank you. Thank you.
Let me start briefly from the second question about Bilalov. Bilalov played a role of symbol, like PR victim. As guys see, we could dismiss any guys engaged in corruption and so on, so on. I am not sure that problem of Sochi development or Sochi business is restricted by the personality of such a distinguished guy like Bilalov. As for the Russian-Georgian security cooperation, thank you for this question. A couple of years ago, maybe this question would be perceived like paradox or inadequate question, but I raised it even after the 5 Days War, but in a little bit different context. I am absolutely sure that this cooperation would be, and it's inevitable, in the context of the North Caucasus. Because Georgia and Russia share Dagestani, Chechen, and Ingush parts of the border. And this problem is not problem of only Russia. You remember brilliantly the recent experience of Lapota Gorge and previous experience of Pankisi Gorge. It's very dangerous. Many people in Georgia dreamed and dream now Russia would leave the North Caucasus. I think it would be a nightmare for Georgia. Because Russia could go to Siberia or Ural, Far East, but Georgia has no Siberia, Ural, Far East, and so on. It would face real problems. And I think this context would make our countries closer. As for Sochi security cooperation, maybe, but here I am more skeptical. But in the North Caucasus, eastern part of the North Caucasus from the Russian side, yeah, it's potentially possible. It would help, by the way, to promote normalization of the countries, taking aside the status issues of Abkhazia and South Ossetia.
Toby Davis, U.S. Department of State. Thank you very much for your presentation. If Russia gets through the Sochi Olympics without any major incident, what do you predict relations will be like between Russia and the North Caucasus republics, Georgia, Abkhazia region? And then on the other side, if there is some incident, how do you think those relations will change? Thank you.
Yeah, of course I want to be optimist, of course, but being an expert, I could not be optimist extremely. It's necessary to be more or less pessimistic to be an expert.
What's the over/under in Vegas?
In another way, I would be
Olympics.
I would be a politician, especially European politicians who believe in progress. Bosnia progress, Kosovo progress, Georgia progress, everywhere progress. But I'm not European politician. I am an expert with a Russian background. This is why I need to be more pessimistic or realistic. I don't think that Sochi would dramatically change the Russian attitude to the Caucasus or to Georgia. Maybe if those incidents would be directly connected with Georgian engagement or Abkhaz engagement, yes. If no, I don't think that Russia would make something new in terms of struggle against terrorism or normalization with Georgia in order to have more chances to effectively struggle against terrorism and so on. This is why, of course, I want that Sochi Olympics would be with no incidents. I have many criticism to Vladimir Putin, to the Russian government, but at the same time, I'm not Vladimir Ilyich Lenin and Bolshevik who really wished the defeat of their own national government in World War I. We know the results of these desires. This is why I am not champion of this approach. And it's sad for me that many competitors of mine try to behave like Bolsheviks.
It's an interesting question, Toby. Depend upon the incident and the extent to which we knew from where the incident was perpetrated or who were the perpetrators. But boy, I think this would be extremely inflammatory for Russian public opinion. And personally for Putin, he would take it very, very, very badly. This really is there's a lot of symbolic value in this event. So, of course, I agree with Sergei. And let's.
But nevertheless, I could not imagine right now that Russia, after some incidents, if they would provide carpet bombarding of the North Caucasus or so on. Even understand the symbolic importance of this event for Vladimir Putin and the Russian government.
Thank you very much for an interesting presentation. Ulvi Ismail, independent consultant. You mentioned, you started your presentation with what happened in '79 and subsequent 1988 Olympic Games in Soviet Union, with Soviet Union's intervention in Afghanistan and the boycott from the West. Well, today we have Syria issue, which, as recent G20 summit showed, disagreements between President Putin and President Obama, the pictures around, and Russian media still today writes about victory of Russia on this issue. Do you think that as the history can repeat itself as few years ago, something like that, which is a security issue beyond Russia's border or USSR border, not within, but coupled with Russia's human rights issues that has been criticized recently, be it the recent protests and arrests, the Pussy Riot case and Khodorkovsky and other cases, can be causing to again boycott of the Olympics by the Western countries. And would you think then would be considered as kind of jealousy or skepticism of the West, unfair treatment of the Russia by the West? And do you think Russia in this case is much different from China, for example, who hosted Beijing Olympics 2008? So what's your take on that? Thank you so much.
Interesting question, and maybe it takes to write a special monograph about it. But it's very important thing. I think you raise or you draw our attention to the differences between the USSR and contemporary Russia. I'm repeating once again. tensions and bilateral problems in relationship between the West, United States and European Union and Russia are not ideological. They are based more on business, on pragmatism. Many people from Georgia like to repeat, let's see 2,000 soldiers from Georgia serve in Afghanistan. Great, of course, but 4,500 flights annually from the West to Afghanistan are provided through so-called Northern Corridor through Russia. Russia is not member of NATO. And it's official information represented by the Department of State. This is why I think there are many common points in terms of business, in terms of security. And Syria, I don't think that it's a problem of clash or differences between President Obama and President Vladimir Putin. I think President Navalny, or even Prokhorov, by the way, who was rather critical to the Western approach to Syria, would provide practically the same policy, maybe with noisy anti-American rhetoric addressed first and foremost to the domestic audience. Maybe. As for me personally, I am against this noisy anti-American rhetoric. It's not pragmatic. I'm for pragmatism. But it doesn't mean that Syria is a case of dictatorship solidarity and so on. Don't forget that Russia has a substantial Muslim minority, very substantial. In 7 constituencies, Muslims are the dominant groups, ethnic Muslims. And a turmoil around Russia and influence from the Middle East to Russia is a concern. Secular Syrian regime supported Russia in Chechnya, supported Russia in Georgia, and so on. But if we would imagine the overthrow and maybe collapse of power in Syria, or split of the country, or victory of radical Muslims, it's not theories, because we see some negative results of so-called Arab Spring in Egypt and
Go ahead, sort of.
yeah, and so on and so on. This is why I don't think that the West would repeat approach of 1979, 1980 to Russia today. Because one principal difference, no Russian troops in Syria. If they would be deployed there, let's come back to this discussion. But I'm not sure that they would be really deployed. Mikhail Leontiev or some other journalists could discuss it for the TV watchers, for the Russian audience, but I'm not sure that Vladimir Putin would seriously take it into account.
Let me give you a little personal response. I remember very well the boycott of the 1980 Olympics. I hated that decision. I thought that was a terrible decision on the part of the Carter administration and other European governments that followed it. Why? Because basically who was punished were the athletes who would compete. At the time, I was a track athlete. I was a 400-meter runner. I was not a world-class runner, but I was a national-class runner. I was a pretty fast white guy. And I ran against a lot of guys that would have competed in those Olympics and sometimes trained with them. And to lose that opportunity, for some people, it was the opportunity of a lifetime. One of the greatest track athletes ever, Ronaldo Nehemiah, who held the world record in the 110 high hurdles. Didn't run in that and never ran again because he started playing pro football. I just thought it was a terrible decision to even further politicize the Olympic Games, which are already overly politicized in my view. So I would be violently opposed to any boycott of the Games. But there are some people that you'll hear some voices calling for a boycott of the Games because the Russians doing this and the Russians doing that. And if something very bad happened in the U.S.-Russia relationship from the perspective of the U.S., you would hear those voices more. But I think the only justifiable reason to not to boycott Olympic Games, but would be to cancel Olympic Games because of a very, very, very imminent security risk, which is not unimaginable, but not the most likely thing to happen. Okay, sorry, I just had to say that. I was very, very angry. And I still am about it,
It was
32 years later.
It was very interesting answer because I was a student that time, but I brilliantly remember the situation around. And for the Olympic Games in Lake Placid, I was especially impressed by Eric Hayden, who was a skate runner who won 5 gold medals. I was really impressed, and I supported him, putting aside Cold War and some anti-American sentiments and so on. And I remember his interview to the Soviet newspapers when he reproduced practically the same argument that Andy does now.
But I don't suppose you were rooting for that American hockey team in 1980, were you?
I cried.
Also, one, I'm sure, just like I cried when the United States lost in basketball in 1972 in Munich. But the other thing is that, I mean, okay, you've got this international venue, and it's, so let the athletes compete. I mean, let the American athletes go to Moscow or go to Sochi, and okay. You got the point. All right. I think we have time for, well, we're running out of time. If someone's got a question or comment they absolutely feel necessary, okay, you've got it. Last one, right here.
Evgenia Tairian, independent analyst. Sergey, thank you very much for your great presentation. Just to finalize, if you can give some kind of suggestion or advice to the Russian government, if you can just draw some kind of conclusion, what would you do or what you would change to make Sochi Olympics more secure and more successful? Thank you.
If I would be brief, I could give such suggestions. First of all, be more sophisticated, be more careful, be more pragmatic. For such money, snow would be.
Right. $50 billion, you think they could get some snow there. Yeah. And counting. I would follow up on a line. I would be consulting with those that were responsible for previous Olympic Games, the Vancouver Games, the London Games, the Beijing Games, and this would be going on quietly and behind closed doors to just try to bring every means possible from a technical and logistical security standpoint to ensure the safety of the games. As a last point, since I want to wish success once again, not because this will be a feather in the hat of Vladimir Putin, but just because you want to see a successful Olympic Games and what the Olympic spirit and movement is all about. There was an Olympic Games in which, at the time, there was not a major resort at this area, which developed into one of the premier, largest ski resorts in the world. That happens to be Squaw Valley, 1960, California. Mm-hmm. Now, and this is right around Lake Tahoe, similar to in the Sierra Nevada mountains, similar to the region around Sochi, the combination of this beautiful water, Lake Tahoe and the mountains, but it had not snowed at all. And literally, there was a serious problem because they didn't have the kind of snowmaking equipment that they have now. And thank God, about a day or two before the Olympics, it did snow, and the games came off successfully. And it put Squaw Valley and the Sierra Nevada and the Lake Tahoe region on the map as a major ski resort and destination. So I hope that Sochi has the same impact for the Caucasus as a world-class ski resort and destination for Russia. Sergey, thanks for a terrific presentation, and as always, and thank you for coming and providing very thoughtful comments and questions.